For a long time, I've been hearing that people can't afford to buy homes. It never made any sense to me. We live in a capitalist society. If people could not afford a home, then the price of homes should come down. But the prices don't come down. Why? It occurred to me that the problem was actually the percentage of total earned income that a person makes relative to what other people make. When it comes to things like real estate, that is what ultimately determines the person's buying power. I did a quick Google search, and there it was. A Pew Research study about the percentage of total earned income that was paid to the American middle class from 1970 to 2019. The study not only explained why the price of real estate doesn't come down, but why people are storming the Capitol and demanding that their lives matter. More importantly, it makes clear the solution. And it is a solution that helps everybody. Calibration, optimizing capitalism. In 1970, in America, the middle class, the middle 60% of people working, earned 62% of the total earned income. In 2019, the middle 60% of people working earned 42% of the total earned income. That is a 20% drop. That is 20% of the whole. But 20% of 60% that the middle class had earned represents a 1/3 drop of the middle class income. The entire 20% that was the middle class income in 1970 has been redistributed to the top 20% of wage earners. When the middle class lost 1/3 of their income, they lost the ability to financially compete for what is called fixed assets. A fixed asset is something that can be owned and tends to increase in value over time. Fixed assets is where the magic of compound interest resides. Stocks and real estate are the two primary fixed assets. Everyone wants to own fixed assets. That means the middle class compete with the wealthy for fixed assets. 89% of all stocks are owned by 10% of Americans. The economy of the 1960s had a 4.5% growth rate. Currently, we hover around 2%. So when the middle class made 1/3 more, the economy grew more than twice as fast. In the 1960s, the federal government debt-to-GDP ratio averaged 41%. Currently, the debt-to-GDP ratio was 117%, which is as high as it was during the Second World War. So companies have transferred 1/3 of the money that they pay the middle-class employees to the top 20%. As a result, the government has to create inefficient government programs to compensate. If you make between $28,000 a year and $124,000 a year, you are in the middle class. On average, you would be making 50% more in 1970 in America than you do now. That means, on average, someone making $68,000 a year would be making around $100,000 a year. A couple would be making $60,000 a year more. That means that most people wouldn't need government health care. In 2019, the total earned income paid to all American workers was $16.8 trillion. The top 20% of wage earners received 48% of the $16.8 trillion, which was $8 trillion. The debt-to-GDP ratio in 2019 was 107%, or $22.7 trillion. The top 20% of wage earners paid roughly 76% of the total tax. That means they are paying off 76% of $22.7 trillion of debt, or $17.2 trillion. If the top 20% of wage earners were to once again, like they did in 1970, receive 30% of the total earned income that they did in the 1960s, and the economy grew at 4.5% as it did in the 1960s, then the economy would be $3 trillion more, or $25 trillion. And the total earned income for all Americans would be $19 trillion, and the top 20% of wage earners who earned a 30% share would be earning $5.7 trillion. So it doesn't make any sense for the people earning the top 20% to take 1/3 of the middle class income, only to have the government borrow money to create an inefficient government program in order to avoid a revolution because of financial desperation. If the debt to GDP ratio was 41%, as it was during the 1960s, the national debt would only be $9 trillion. The middle class will now be earning 60% of the total earned income. The top 20% of wage earners would only be responsible for 47.5% of the smaller $9 trillion tax burden, which is $4.3 trillion. So the question for the top 20% of wage earners is, do you want to earn $8 trillion and be responsible for $17 trillion in debt, or do you want to earn $5.7 trillion and be responsible for $4.3 trillion in debt? Regulating large segments of the economy is what the government does really well. Individual companies can't just start paying employees a higher percentage, because then they will lose all the top executives to other businesses that will pay them more. So the government can base the corporate tax rate on the percentage of earned income that they pay their middle class employees. That way the companies are deciding between paying the government or paying their employees. That works perfectly in the NFL. They force every franchise to pay 55% of their gross revenue into a pool, and that is given to the 32 teams to pay the players' salaries. As a result, 80% of the NFL games are competitive. As a result, they produce 70 of the top 100 highest rated shows on television. Of all the shows made, 70 of the top 100 highest rated shows are made by the National Football League. Major League Baseball is run like our economy has been since the 1980s. They were a $9 billion a year league in 2000, and now are a $10 billion a year league. The NFL was a $4 billion a year league in 2000, and now are a $17 billion a year league. The NFL optimized the competition, and prosperity follows. Maybe this is why people are storming the Capitol, and this is one of the reasons why people are proclaiming in the streets that their lives matter. The middle class will be able to buy a house, buy stocks, pay enough in taxes so the schools can be run properly. Teachers don't have to buy their own supplies. If the economy is calibrated, then people will know that if the top executives get a raise, everyone in the company will get a raise proportionally. So they will feel connected to the business and motivated to make the business more successful. We will once again have a common purpose, a competitive economy, and capitalism will be optimized. Calibration, optimizing capitalism.